After doing an episode about Mighty Number 9 on that author review I figured I could review a much better received Megaman homage as a palate cleanser. Not only was this game released this year, but I also happened to support it on its Kickstarter campaign 3 years earlier. Disclaimer, I'm not sponsored by the developers or the publishers and all that. You might be wondering why I supported it even though I have practically zero interest in Mega Man games. I do fancy me some 3D action platformers, so might as well. Let's then take a look at Protodroid DeLTA.
The game's director and lead designer is Adam Karim, who before this has solely done prototype demos related to Mega Man, Sonic the Hedgehog and Ape Escape, and as the lead scriptwriter there's Brian Protodude Austrin, who has his own website Megaman Corner that is dedicated exclusively to Mega Man news and articles. To be accurate, this game is more inspired by the spin-off series Megaman X and aims to translate its faster-paced gameplay into 3D. In other words, it tries to be like Megaman X 7X but made by people who actually cared.
The game, however, doesn't follow X's darker tone and instead has brighter solarpunk aesthetic and a vision of future in the year 21, where the combination of science and nature has brought peace and prosperity. But no paradise is free from vipers.
In this case, Vipers with a Y refer to combat machines that human gang leaders known as Viper Masters used to keep their territories in the land of Radia in chaos and fear. Meanwhile, in another part of the country, a renowned AI expert Noor Shelton, played by Tiffany Witcher under the alias JC Brazil, is testing her latest invention Protodroid DeLTA, played by Danny Chambers, who is meant to show the potential robots with human-like AI can bring. It is, however, unclear what DeLTA's practical purpose is supposed to be. She has a laser cannon and a sword, yet it's stated she's not intended for combat. Looks like Dr. Sheldon follows the Cave Johnson method of throwing science to the wall and seeing what sticks.
To be fair, the story does eventually explain her combat abilities, which I won't spoil, but it's kind of nonsensical when you really stop to analyze it. I'll later go into further details about all the irks that the writing has, but what comes to voice acting, it's okay. It has this stylized Saturday morning cartoon vibe a la Freedom Planet, though it doesn't commit to it that much.
We just need to run one more diagnostic on your systems.
Understood. However, Doctor, you said just one more diagnostic exactly 98 tests ago. While your optimism is encouraging, might I suggest a different phrase?
Might I suggest if you don't stop.
And yes, sometimes dialogue tries too hard to be funny, but most of the time it has the good sense of giving room for drama and not deflated with quirky jokes.
After the tutorial segment, Vipers attack Dr. Shelton's laboratories for reasons unknown, and just when DeLTA is getting outnumbered, she's saved by Sofia Narvaez's played fellow android called Android. Haha, get it? Unlike DeLTA, whose personality is algorithm-constructed, Androids is a digital copy of her creator Ana Lucia Drado, played by Jenny Ann, who wishes to get rid of Viper Masters permanently. Dr. Shelton, however, and by extension her creation, respect the sanctity of life, so they will eventually have a class about it. For now though, Android's heroic example has inspired DeLTA to upgrade herself from slacktivist to activist and actually go out there to put an end to Viper Masters' reign of terror. You know, it's refreshing that a robot character decides to make a morally upstanding initiative herself, thus showing her capability to grow as a person beyond her programming. Overall, the cast, at least what comes to the hero side, isn't anything too complex, but they have enough characteristics to make them adequately engaging. Well, Dr. Sheldon can get annoying for acting self-confidently smug 24/7. But to be fair, if I was a super genius whose inventions help maintaining an intellectual utopia, would I be any humbler?
Character designs are cool all around, with their lush brightness, and while using comic panels for cutscenes is a static budgetary solution, at least it looks like the characters are feeling something, which is more than a certain bigger budget Megaman homage can say. Solar Park also gives lesson to the environments that are always above the ground, and while they may be a tad cheap looking with the lack of textures, they're not distractingly so. Well, enemies are more generic looking, but even in that case it's more of a service purpose kind of deal, focusing more on the functionality. And most of the time art is aware of its limitations and how to use them to its advantage. So let's then start the journey of DeLTA in the territories of Viper Masters that can be doing any orders he wants, and ask them nicely if they have considered not to be bad guys. Well, after kicking their asses first, of course. These people always insist on that.
All levels aside from the final one are divided into 5 segments, from which 2 are boss fights, though you can make detours to bonus levels with energy or health upgrades waiting at the end, where you can truly test your platforming skills. Some have said the platforming in this game to be rudimentary, but I don't really agree with that. Sure, at the start your skill set is limited only one way to attack with both weapons, and the only jumping specialty being the charge jump, you have to start from solid floor. But the further you go, the more moving and attacking arsenal you'll get, both by defeating Vipers and from finding optional routes where Android is waiting to gifts. For example, getting to replace the more complicated dash maneuver with easier dashing mid-air. Depending at which order you find these abilities, it can make the later stages too easy, but in such cases it all comes down to if platforming has a good flow to it. And I think the game achieves that with varying movement challenges and environmental traps. As for combat abilities, they serve their purpose in making scrap metal production faster, but switching between them in hectic combat isn't usually a viable tactic, and some of them, like the shield that makes too few hits before disintegrating, are pretty much useless.
To my knowledge, Weapon Masters aren't weak to each other's abilities in the same way as in a classic Megaman formula, but they are weak as characters, that's for sure. This is partially caused by weak world building. While I appreciate a brighter sci-fi future after all those run-of-the-mill cyberpunk angst, I think the developers did a too good of a job with it, because none of them have a good reason to be villains.
The masked Ray Aleprihe wants to gather social media clout with insane stunts, so he is the most believable with the good old for fun and sports motive, but even then, we never get to the street level to see what kind of damage the masters have caused. I don't mean you'd have to show bloody carnage necessarily, just something to show their fearsome reputations on Earth. This comes clashing with Rocky Jones, who is supposed to be the roughest guy in the slums, but I find it hard to believe this goofy goober would seriously hurt anyone. Not to mention the crime family heir Evelyn Wang, who, well, I'm sure her family does a lot of business with that nondescript crime we don't see going around. Then there's Sasha Shelton, who is indeed Dr. Shelton's niece, who wants to get out of her inventor parent's shadow, and the best way this teenage hormone thought that could be achieved was to become a crime lord. What?!
Based on the game's Kickstarter campaign, I expected more out of its social commentary, so it is disappointing how watered down it turned out to be. Then again, do Megaman fans care about the stories in these games? A genuine question. The reviews I've seen about them always focus on the mechanics, barely acknowledging what tired scheme Dr. Wily is pulling out this time.
Mechanically, Viper Masters and the mid-bosses of each of their turns are more enjoyable. The battles have received criticism for being all the same, which I don't fully agree with. They do have different tactics, but the type of area they are fought on doesn't change, so I understand why they all would feel the same. I got a decent challenge out of them and other combat encounters, even if they're not that memorable, with the exception of a sudden difficulty jumping Rocky Jones' third mid-boss that was so difficult to maneuver around that I had to stop and get more skills by completing other levels first.
The experience has the danger of becoming repetitive, but luckily it only lasts about 6 to 8 hours, so it never got to that point, at least for me. If Protodroid DeLTA is judged purely on as a game to be played, I'd say I got my backer some sport.
Narrative elements leave a lot to be desired, as the story's conflict is so thinly built and simplified that even the teenagers Megaman X games are targeted to would roll their eyes. At least the good guys are likable, which is more than Mighty Number 9 can say. Gameplay is steadier in its quality, offering a decent set of platforming challenges and combat encounters, and while both can get repetitive, the package doesn't overstay its welcome. Audiovisuals are decent enough as well, with cheap yet pleasantly vibrant graphics and rock strumming that isn't particularly memorable but serves its purpose. Overall, this homage to the Blue Blur isn't anything groundbreaking, but it can provide an adequately entertaining afternoon.
Whenever our favorite AI Amiga's adventures are going to continue is at the time of this video uncertain. In some backer messages, Mr. Karam has expressed his distaste towards the whole process and wanted to turn away from video games for good, having to switch to a different Unreal Engine version in the middle of production, thus practically having to start from scratch can do that to a person. But in a recent interview it seems that he has mellowed out a bit and has said that his next project is going to come maybe at some point, but rather later than sooner. Well, in the meanwhile, you can read the 20-page prequel comic Year Zero if you really need more Protodroid action to your life. At least in that, you can actually see stuff from the streets.